Hello, this is a homily for the 14th Sunday of the year. The readings today deal with our relationship with God in faith. And we've got to appreciate that faith is not something about feelings primarily. It's about taking in the truth that God communicates to us. So faith is very much coupled with revelation. And that revelation continues in the church through the scriptures and through the tradition of the church. And so we're coming up against this revelation frequently. And the test always is, what do I do? Do I not like it or have some other kind of interpretation of life from the modern sentimental popular culture, or do I say, Lord, if that's what you want, then that's what I'm going to do? And we're all very much aware of Mary's commitment to the angel, I am the handmaid of the Lord. There's a disponibility there that is central to the Catholic idea of faith. To illustrate these things, we have the readings, first of all, from Ezekiel chapter 2. And Ezekiel speaks about his call and the fact that he is being sent to a rebellious people. Whether they heed or resist, they are a rebellious house. And the whole point of this reading is he's called, he's sent, he goes to announce the will of God to the people of Israel and Judah. And the whole point is, God says, they shall know that a prophet has been among them. In other words, the prophet is literally going to be standing in their history by standing in their marketplace, preaching in their synagogues, and they're going to know, there weren't any synagogues at that point, preaching in their gatherings, but they are going to know that God's messenger has been among them. And literally each person then is put on the spot because, okay, I have heard the will of God. What am I doing about it? The second piece of the Old Testament that we read today, or sing today, is the Psalm 123. And this is the prayer of the faithful one. This is the one, and you'll notice that there is no mention of emotion, either in the reading from Ezekiel or this Psalm 123. What we are given is the song of the faithful one. To you I lift up my eyes. This is the attitude. As the eyes of servants are on the hands of their masters. That's all we are, despite any egoism on our part or any thought that we're doing God a favor. We are simply servants of the will of God. And if we truly can have that understanding as the center of our lives, then a lot of things become very clear very quickly. And in fact, St. Ignatius of Loyola even says, is it the will of God that you get married? Find that out first. He gives a second example in the psalm, as the eyes of a maid are on the hands of her mistress. So our eyes are on the Lord. So in terms of the Christian period of history, we would say our eyes are on Christ as he manifests himself in Scripture and as he manifests himself in the tradition of his body, the church. Then the psalmist shifts to the attitude of the unfaithful. We are more than sated with contempt. Our souls are more than sated with the mockery of the arrogant. He says even though he's faithful, even though he's committed to the will of God, this unfaithfulness, this pride, this arrogance, this contempt for the will of God can surge up in him. And then we go back to the antiphon. Our eyes are fixed on the Lord, pleading for his mercy. Because even though we are trying to be faithful, we know we're going to struggle with, well, I don't like this teaching. I don't feel like doing that, and so on and so on and so on. In the second reading, we have a piece of literally the biography of Paul, St. Paul, and this obviously is Christian period, and this is his letter to the Corinthians. That I might not become too elated because of the abundance of the revelations, that I don't get too proud of myself, that I don't get too arrogant, too presumptuous. A thorn in the flesh has been given to me, an angel of Satan, to beat me, to keep me from being too elated. Every time that Paul, and he says this, he spoke to the Lord asking for this thorn in the flesh, and we have no idea what it is, despite gallons of ink being spilled on it. Every time Paul approached the Lord and asked for this, whatever it was, to be taken away, the Lord said, and this is the key to this whole reading, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. Because God's grace is so enormous, so powerful, so fulfilling, he knows, finally, that it doesn't matter what this particular handicap was. God is working through him, and in fact, it's precisely his weakness, his inability, his clumsiness even sometimes. God's grace will work through him because he is a disponible person. He is following the will of God and preaching as God has impelled him to preach. As a result, this is the beauty of Paul going through the experience, rather than saying, well, that saying is too hard. I don't like that teaching, and all the other excuses that we make up. Paul says, after discovering that God's grace is sufficient, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ. In other words, he's come to a new position in his relationship to Christ. His own clumsiness, suffering, external persecution, etc., all allows the grace of God to work. And so our kind of either perfectionist notion of that we learn from the culture, or the sloppy notion of being a person that we can learn from different parts of the culture, neither of these are appropriate to me relating to God, God relating to me, and me being slowly drawn to being a fuller, complete, authentic human being by the grace of God. Lastly, then, we have the gospel, and the gospel is Jesus going to preach in the synagogue, and it deals particularly with the reaction. This is from Mark's gospel. Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? Is he not the carpenter? They're all trying to denigrate who he is, and particularly what he is saying. And if anybody has done any preaching, we all know that problem. The issue is the preaching itself is true, and in this case it's coming from the mouth of Jesus himself, and yet still they were able to make up excuses which really concealed the fact that they didn't want to listen. So Mark says they took offense at him. This is the easy way to deal with something that they don't want to appreciate. And we see that often enough in our modern culture. If somebody can create a way of taking offense at something that is said in the marketplace, then it can be rejected. And it can be rejected without dealing with the truth that it contains. So Jesus says, a prophet is not without honor except in his native place, and among his own kin, and in his own house. So the truth simply doesn't achieve what it was sent to achieve. We have this announcement from the incarnate God of the will of God, and it's simply, he's just shut off by their hard-heartedness, unfaithfulness, and all the excuses that they've worked out so that they don't have to listen. And the tragic part is, he was not able to perform any mighty deed there. So these people literally talked themselves out of the goodness of God. That is frightening. That is really a terrifying thing. Apart from curing a few people by laying his hands on them, he was amazed at their lack of faith. They're just not interested. And the question for us is, are we?